Hello, record players. Thank you once again for joining me. Scott with you. I am joined by a gentleman who has been part of the Canadian music scene for as long as I can remember. He's a singer, songwriter, producer. He's recently toured with a supergroup of sorts with a whole bunch of other well known Canadian stars. He went from being confused and upset about what it was like to be an adult now to becoming a college professor of music production. We know him best as the leader of one of the best bands this country has ever produced, The Pursuit of Happiness. Welcome to the record player Moe Berg. It's great to have you.
Oh, great to be here.
Um, you grew up in Edmonton, playing in various bands in the Edmonton area. Why the move to Toronto? I mean, what was the music scene like back then in Edmonton?
Well, there was the music scene was like, I mean, the problems with the music scene, there was no business infrastructure there, so there was no way to make it, I guess, if you want to say that. There was and the way the liquor licenses were there is you couldn't actually have a nightclub. So uh, you could only drink at a bar that was part of a hotel complex. And so all the bars were hotel bars.
Mhm.
And so and then you could you could drink at a restaurant, but had to order food. You just couldn't go into a restaurant and have a glass of wine or a beer or something like that. And so there isn't really the kind of infrastructure that you need to promote uh, music there. And so the hotel bars would just have cover bands. And so I sort of came of age during the sort of punk scene, and so which was great because the whole punk ethos was to do it yourself. And so people would just throw gigs you know, um, and often, they'd be unlicensed gigs or whatever, but you just throw a show at rent a hall or something like that. Or, there was one hotel called the Corona in downtown Toronto, and they would sort of slum it every once in a while, let punk bands play there on a Tuesday night or something. So it was a dead end. The town was a dead end. So it was like a bunch of my friends had already moved out to Toronto, and so I kind of went to visit with the idea like I want to scope it out and see if this would be a good move for me. And then I arrived in Toronto and I went to a little box and I found an Now magazine and I opened it up, and then I'm looking through all the listings for all the bands playing there, and I said, wow, there's a lot of shows coming up, at least, and my friend said, no, all these shows are tonight. I said, well, there wouldn't be this many shows in an entire year in Edmonton. So it's
Wow.
like, I'm moving here.
Did you move here with David Gilby?
Yeah.
So he came with you.
Yeah, he came with me. Oddly, we originally had no plans to play together. We just kind of both decided this was a good idea. And he was sort of talking to some other people about starting a band, and we ended up moving into the same apartment together. Him and so he was sort of pursuing this other thing, and I was kind of looking for band members. And then one day he said, "This is ridiculous. I'll play drums for you." And yeah, so he was my first piece of the Pursuit of Happiness puzzle.
And I want you to continue carry on a little bit about the rest of the puzzle. You guys get together. You sort of group some musicians together more as an indie project. You hadn't been signed yet. Just basically playing anywhere you could play. How
Yeah.
did the members sort of come together as one?
Well, there was Johnny Sinclair, who ended up being the bass player. He was somebody that we knew from out west, and he'd been in some bands from out west, and we used to tour around, to Regina, Saskatchewan, Winnipeg, Vancouver. There was, those you'd sort of go and hit every big city if you were sort of a originals band, which was a very hard thing to be in Edmonton. And so anyway, so he'd played a show that we'd been on, and so when I arrived in Toronto, he kind of cold called me. He found out I was in town, and he cold called me and say, "Hey, I'm in town, and do you want to meet for a drink or something?" We met for a drink. We kind of hit it off, and he was playing in a band here in Toronto, and I was kind of looking for musicians, and it was really hard because, um, uh, I hadn't been used to the idea, like there wasn't any gigs for anybody in Edmonton. So if you found a musician that was a good musician and said, "Do you want to be in a band?" They'd be like, "Yeah, I do." Whereas in Toronto, like people were in like seven other bands, because there was all this gigs that are out here to play, and so I was a bit frustrated by it. And so eventually Johnny left his other band and said, I want to play with you guys. And me and him had become pretty close friends at that point. And so then Dave had known these two women from out in Winnipeg, and they'd been in this band called Dash and the Dots. And they were sort of a cover band from Winnipeg. And so they had arrived in Toronto too. So Dave got wind of the fact that they were in Toronto. And so we kind of got in touch with them and said, we're putting this band together and we need some singers. Do you want to be in part of the band? And they were that's how it kind of came together. So everyone in the band was a transplanted Westerner, the original Pursuit of Happiness.
Mhm. You before you got signed to the major label to do Love Junk, you had some lineup changes. Chris Abbott had joined the band before you got into the studio, correct?
Yeah, so the band that I just talked about with Tam and Tosh Mobley and Johnny and Dave and myself, we recorded that original version of I'm an Adult Now, and we recorded the original video of I'm an Adult Now.
The indie
And so
version,
that was the thing that
and
really kickstarted our career.
the video was on the street, right? When you did the
Yeah,
original video.
yeah. And so I had a friend, Nelu Giran, he was a film director. And so, this is when, videos were kind of in their infancy. It was like, I mean, they've been around for a while, but it was the kind of time where you could make a video and Much Music would probably play it. So, so anyway, so we had done some demos at a guy named Scott DeSmith's house. And so we used one of the demos. It was for a song, I'm an Adult Now. And we just kind of almost picked it at random, quite honestly. And it wasn't like, hey, this is going to be our big hit. It was just kind of a random choice for a song. It seemed like it would make a good video. And so we shot the video, and then we took it to Much Music, and Much Music, because I thought they just played on their alternative music hour, their indie hour, and then they put it into full rotation. So that kind of changed the whole game, because so suddenly we had a video on our national network, and I was begging people for shows and begging people to come out and check us out and maybe be our agent or manager. And then, like, about a week after the video came out, it was like I came home from work. Me and Johnny worked at a book warehouse, and my answering machine was full of people saying, don't talk to anybody else, talk to me first. And so yeah, our fortunes changed dramatically at that point.
Love Junk. Before you get into the studio, did you guys ever think about producing the record yourself? I know it eventually got done by Todd Rundgren. How did that come about? I mean, Todd Rundgren at that point had worked with obviously his own stuff, Utopia and stuff, but Todd Rundgren produced Bat Out of Hell.
Yeah. No, I mean, his production resume is quite staggering. He's had, he's helped a lot of bands have hit records, Grand Funk and Meatloaf and XTC, and I mean, the list is endless. But anyway, yeah, as you said, we ended up having some personnel changes. The Mobley sisters wanted to go off and do their own music, and so they left, and that's when we found Chris Abbott and Leslie Stanwyck, and so then that became the band that was signed to Chrysalis, which is a label out in it was a British label, but we got signed out of the New York office. And so anyway, so we were traveling around in a van playing shows, and we were able to play some shows in the U.S. At the time. And so we ended up in New York City, and where our record company was, Chrysalis. And so we had a meeting with them, and they said, who do you want to produce your record? And I said, well, what about Todd Rundgren? Because Todd Rundgren was kind of my hero. I loved his music. I loved his production. He was my guy. And I had no illusion that would even happen. But, someone says, if you could have any food you want, what would it be? And then you just say what food you want. So I just sort of blurted out his name, and then I honestly never gave it another thought. We got back in our van and drove around, and then we ended back into Canada via Winnipeg. And so we entered, we got to Winnipeg. We had a show there, and Winnipeg was very interesting because Winnipeg was where the A&R person from the New York office of Chrysalis first saw us, and that's where she saw us and signed the band. So now we're back in Winnipeg again, some months later, and her name was Kate Hyman. And so we're back, and so we're at soundcheck, and then someone says, hey, there's a phone call for you, Mo. And so I go in and pick up the phone, I say hello, and he goes, hi, Mo, it's Todd Rundgren. It's like, what a moment. Like, can you imagine? Like, you think of the person you admire most in the music business, just cold calling you, just calling you up on the phone, you just answer the phone, you had no idea that it was going to happen. So so we had a conversation about it, and that was it. We started with that. He bought into producing the record.
I think when people think of that first record and maybe some of the earlier stuff that you guys did, there was a certain element of humor and youthfulness in the songs, obviously, with I'm an Adult Now and Killed by Love and stuff like that. But some of the better songs, I think, on that record were Consciousness Raising as a Social Tool, Walking in the Woods, things like that. A little bit more of a heavier subject matter, I think.
Sure.
Is it easier to write songs where you're just goofing around and being a young guy and sort of using the humor part of it, or is it?
Well, I never really approached it either any way. I honestly never it was intentionally funny or intentionally serious.
Right.
I mean, it was just kind of whatever was happening at any particular moment. It's funny, I'm an adult now. Just almost came to me. There's sort of mythology about where do songs come from, and it's like, and so but it was really kind of like that. I was just kind of ruminating on something, and I was walking down the street, and I just kind of had this idea. I'm an adult now, blah, blah, all the problems of an adult on my head and my shoulders, and started thinking of all these little scenarios, of things that an adult can do, an adult sort of things that an adult can no longer do or cannot, and so I just started thinking about that. It was just, that was the idea, and it just kind of flooded into me, and I raced home, and I was actually living in my mom's house, getting ready to actually move out to Toronto. And so was out of my apartment that I had in Edmonton, and so I literally scribbled it all down on a piece of paper, and I started playing chords, and I had sort of had a melody in my head when I was walking, and it just kind of came together in about a half an hour. And again, I wasn't necessarily thinking, oh, this is hilarious. I was just thinking, get this down on paper, whatever it is going through your mind. And I wasn't trying to come up with a great joke or anything.
Yeah.
I mean, something like, walking in the woods. Um, it, uh, this is going to sound crazy or terrible or whatever, but me and Johnny, our bass player, used to have this game, and it was called Cutest Girl in the Subway. So we had to ride the subway for an hour back, and hour to work and an hour home to work. We worked way out in Etobicoke, which is like a suburb way out in West Toronto. And so you just, whatever, you're mindless, and you say, the game is like you look around the car and see the cutest girl in the subway, and that's the end of the game. It's not much of a game. It's just like, all right, well, that's a fun game. Okay, who do you think is her? Okay. So what else are we going to talk about? It was like that. And so it was kind of, that was the impetus of it. So I was alone on the subway, and I saw this girl, and I just started to have all these sort of like creepy thoughts about, like, there had been some kind of like horrific crimes in Toronto around that time, and it kind of made me very nervous and edgy about being on the subway and stuff. And so I guess I just kind of let my mind go, and I just thought, and this sort of really horrific story kind of came into my head, and I just, like I said, I just kind of threw it down instead of getting in my way and worrying about it. And I guess that's one thing, I guess, as a songwriter, that I've always done, is I've just kind of like tried to stay out of my own way. Just like, and I think one of the reasons that people either like or dislike our music is because uh, I I've never been afraid to say anything, and I've never been afraid to make a fool of myself or make myself look bad or make myself look stupid, and because and so that's kind of how I always approached it. Was just like, just say whatever you have to say, and let the chips fall wherever they may.
Hmm. Um, I love that song. I mean, that's probably my favorite song off that album. I think most people, when they think of the best Canadian albums, Love Junk usually gets put on that list. You find yourself going from young guys in Edmonton, making your way to Toronto, get signed, get this album out. You're opening for, Eurythmics. Didn't you open for Eurythmics and a couple of other pretty big bands at that time?
Sure.
Not
Yeah.
necessarily touring, but you're opening for Eurythmics and Duran Duran. Um, was that a culture shock for you? I mean, how did you guys sort of handle that sudden transition into being known?
Right. Well, the initial thing was, once the video came out, then you'd be, I remember going to like a concert a few weeks later, and it was the Smiths at, and so I went at this sort of amphitheater place in Toronto, and all of a sudden, all the kids there were coming up to me and saying, hey, and introduce and saying, hey, you're Moe Berg, hey, you're in the Pursuit of Happiness and all stuff, and I'd been in bands for years, and I never had been that kind of treatment. I never, and so it was a little overwhelming at first. Because I was a fan, I was a music fan. I was the person that would go up to someone and say, "Hey, I think you're really cool," And now people are doing that to me. So that was the initial thing that was like weird, and then, and so that sort of gave us a little bit of something, and then, sorry, I think I may have misunderstood the question. What was it again?
Just how the transition from not being known and being like
Right,
this
right.
band that's trying to play clubs and play anywhere you can play, to suddenly you're getting asked to play places, and you're
Yeah.
open for some pretty
So
big.
that's right. So then, so that when that happened, when we started to get like a recognizable, then it was a lot easier to get shows. Shows came pretty easily, and we were able to tour and go in and get a decent show wherever we went. And then when we got signed to a record deal, then we had the whole machinery. This was back in, the late 80s when the whole record machine was still very powerful. So it was, our record label, called up, whoever was promoting the Duran Duran tour in the US, and we got on the tour. So, we toured the entire US from coast to coast, opening for Duran Duran and hockey arenas, and which was great. I remember someone else was talking about this the other day. I was another band saying, how great it was to finally see all these hockey arenas that you've only seen hockey in. Like we played at the Meadowlands and we played at the Philadelphia Spectrum and all these cool hockey arenas, and so that was kind of fun. And so that was kind of how it was. And so then it's weird because suddenly you're doing this stuff that you kind of always dreamed about. This, you're a kid, you always dreamed about being a rock star, and all of a sudden, you are one, and sort of, not really, but sort of, and it's like
Sure.
you're not a rock star. I didn't feel like I was a rock star, but I was doing rock star-esque things. I was
Yeah.
playing big shows for a lot of people and that kind of thing. And we had record companies, and they were taking us out to dinner, and it all seemed very surreal. Traveling around in a tour bus. All these things are largely just fantasies for most musicians. You'd love to do that one day, and in some ways you think it's inevitable, and then some ways you think this will never ever happen to me. So that was kind of how it was for me. It was just kind of like the weirdest thing. Like it was just such a fun, weird thing. And we tried to sort of take advantage of it. We went out and had a really good time every night, and we played as hard as we could every night. And and then it not long after that tour, we went and just did our own club tour of America, like from coast to coast, and that was a little bit more sobering. Some of the, so you go into some city and it would be amazing. You go into another city and there'd be like 12 people there. So that was also a great experience for us, fantastic. And then right after that, we got asked to do the Eurythmics tour of Europe. So we got to tour all through Europe, playing again gigantic venues, opening for the Eurythmics, and getting to see Europe. And so yeah, it was a amazing time. I mean, I can't. It was a really really fun time. You know.
I imagine in my head, I've got Duran Duran backstage, waiting to get on the plane to the next city, and I've got you guys walking through the hallways of the Spectrum, looking at pictures of Bobby Clark and being more excited about that than you are.
Yeah, it was just like I said, it was just it's kind of a living out a fantasy to some degree, and it all seems very unreal while it's happening.
um, After Love Junk and doing all those touring, you get together to do the One Sided Story record, which was another great album. You continue with the Canadian success. That album didn't do quite as well in America as Love Junk did, but the Canadian success kept going. You guys just kept getting bigger and bigger here. You had some label issues and some record company changes at that point. It was that. First of all, I want to ask: was it you guys that chose the singles for the albums, or was it the record company that comes in and says this is going to be the single?
Well, it's a bit of both, I guess. I mean, largely, you know, I think we fancied ourselves as being smart enough to be able to do something like that, and in hindsight, we probably weren't. We probably didn't know. I mean, it was in terms of like, when I think about the first record, obviously I'm an adult now. It's gonna be the first single. I mean, we'd had some success with it in Canada, but in the States it was still, uh, there it'd been played on some college stations, our independent version. So that was the thrust of it. And then the next song, obvious song, was "She's So Young." It was like the kind of a pop radio friendly kind of song, and so that they wanted to do that, and I had no complaint about it. The next track after that was "Hard to Laugh," and so they chose that one too. So then when we got to the second record, it was, I mean, the song, they picked Two Girls in One, and again, I had no real issue with that. I didn't have a real problem with that. And there was a song on the record called "New Language" that I thought was kind of the "She's So Young" of One Sided Story. So I think we kind of like suggested that that would be a good single, and they kind of went along with it. I don't know how happy they were about that, but they kind of went along with it. And I mean, and you're right. At that point, the point that we're at now talking about this is that the record company had changed massively. Like the people, we had a group of people at Chrysalis during the Love Junk era that were, really great for us. They really believed in the band, and they really liked us, and sort of did, a relatively good job of promoting the band. And then all those people left, and it's bad. It's easy to blame them for any failures, but that's kind of how the music business is, especially in the States. It's like suddenly, people have this, the reason why they liked us is because we were their band. They'd had some sort of hand in signing us and developing us and getting us famous and stuff like that. And so when you get a whole new regime, it's like, well, that's somebody else's band. I've got these other bands that are my bands, and I want to put all my attention on that. And that's clearly how it happens. And you could probably get another dozen people on your show that would tell you the exact same story. So, yeah, so we were kind of, we were kind of fighting for our lives, for a lot of that time. So, but it's and still going out and playing shows and having fun, and that was really kind of the whole goal with us anyway.
You took a bit of a break, and then Downward Road, which was my favorite Pursuit of Happiness album. A little bit older, a little bit more progression and growth, and maybe maturity in the songwriting a little bit. A different sound than kind of the rawness of Love Junk and One Sided Story. You got to Todd Rundgren came back and played a little bit of guitar on one of the songs, and you got to write with Jules Shear. From what I could tell on every other previous record, you had done all the writing. You were your own songwriter, so I had never seen you collaborate with anyone else at that point. What was that experience like, and how did that come about?
Well, so yeah, in terms of working with Jules, I mean, I had this very romantic notion that it's like, if you just let me go, I told the record company, if you just, I'm having a hard time writing songs. If you could just send me to New York, I just need to be in New York City, and I want to be inspired by being in the city and writing songs and stuff like that. And I want to go to Chicago, and I want to write. I want to write in these big American cities and see if it brings me any inspiration. And they said, okay, you can, but you have to write. So they said you have to write with some other people. If you go there, you're gonna have to do some co-writing. And so I said, okay. And so I said, well, in Chicago, I said, I'll write with Pat Denizio from the Smithereens. And because I loved the Smithereens, I thought they were amazing. And then I said, in New York, I'll write with Jules Shear, and I'll write with because Jules Shear had a lot of success co-writing, and I liked him a lot as an artist as well. And Marshall Crenshaw, who is another one of my big heroes. So they said, okay, well, if you write with those guys, then we'll pay for you to go to New York and hang out. And quite honestly, I went to New York and hung out, and I didn't write anything except for the songs that I wrote with Jules and Marshall and Pat. And so, so the songs with Marshall and Pat never ended up seeing the light of day, but the song with Jules, we ended up recording.
Do you prefer writing on your own? Is it more personal, or do you like the collaboration part of it?
Well, I mean, that was just how I was very used to doing it. I writing with other people was wasn't something that was my first real experience of it, was writing with those three guys that I just talked about. I'd never really done it before. And so I found the experience fine. I guess I found the experience of writing with some other people fine. And I guess, like I said, when I was kind of talking about this earlier, I feel like my writing is so idiosyncratic, for better or for worse, that, I find a lot of people would, I'd be, I'd make a suggestion. They just look at me and it's like, no, you can't say that. You can't say that. I mean, I remember when I was writing the song with Marshall Crenshaw, and Marshall, we had this sort of like a little spot where the hook would go, he said, he said, I'm going da 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 da, and he goes, baby food. He said, it's got to be something like that, and I said, what about baby food? Let's make it baby food. And he's like, no, absolutely not. I was just saying that. I don't want it to be baby food. But, that was kind of how my brain worked. And I thought, well, baby food's our hook. Like, where can we go with that? Like, maybe we could find some really funny thing or interesting thing to go with that. So that was the case. I remember writing with another, big guy, and it was the same thing. Somebody had, he was this artist was a fan of my lyrics and really liked my lyrics, and so he said, would you write some lyrics? I'll send you some music. Will you write some lyrics for me? And I said, sure. And so he sent me some music, and I said, what do you want? And he said, well, just do your thing. And so I did my thing, and he just like, I can't sing this. That was the end of the conversation.
Your thing is your thing.
Yeah. So I guess that's what it was. Yeah.
The last couple of albums, Where's the Bone and Wonderful World of Pursuit of Happiness, the one song on Where's the Bone that really kind of took off and has garnered a cult following since is Gretzky Rocks. You wrote that song. Was it out of your love of hockey, being a hockey fan? Had you ever met Wayne Gretzky at that point? I mean, that's a song that we had a post on the record player a couple of weeks ago, non-music related, when it was Gretzky's birthday. Very first thing that gets posted underneath is Gretzky Rocks.
Well, I am. The Gretzky Rocks came about again very innocently, like a lot of these songs. I was actually watching the All Star game. It was like a Sunday afternoon when they show the All Star game,
Mhm.
and he was playing. And this was when he was at this point he was already over at the Kings with the Kings at this point, and so and I remember just thinking to myself, wow, like he's just still so great. Like, he's been, we could even say his best years are behind him at this point, but he's still like during the All-Star game, he was still dazzling. And I remember seeing Gretzky play when he was still playing in the WHA. That's how old I am. And I'd go, my friend's dad, would take us to the games and he'd say, "Look at this guy playing." I was like, "Holy smokes! Like, what is going on with this?" And so I sort of grew up watching Wayne play, and so anyway, so and so at the time I was really into the music of this guy named Jonathan Richman. So Jonathan Richman writes, I don't know if you're familiar with his music, but he writes these really kind of playful, interesting little songs. He writes, he's got a song that he wrote about a chewing gum wrapper, or writes song like about Vincent Van Gogh, or dancing in a lesbian bar, and he has all these sort of like really playful. They're almost like childish kind of songs, and they're really great. The lyrics are always really really good, and so I was really just kind of listening to him all the time. I was really so I thought I want to do something like that too, like a really sort of playful kind of almost like childish kind of song. And I just kind of thought Gretzky Rocks. That's such a teenager kind of thing to say, and so the whole thing was just this little tiny vignette, this little story about Wayne and his life and his hockey stuff, and nothing profound, just kind of threw it all together the same thing way that I would imagine that Jonathan Richman would have done it, but he would have probably done it a lot better. And so that was it. It was, again, it was just, I didn't think that much about it. I just kind of threw it together, and then and then it just kind of seemed like kind of one of those things that's an obvious single in Canada.
Mhm. You growing up in Edmonton, you're not an Oilers fan. You're a Blackhawks fan, as I can
Yeah.
see. I know how that feels because being in Toronto, I'm a Canucks fan, so I get chastised all the time for that. But have you ever met Wayne Gretzky?
Yes. And so I met him. This would be after the record came out. And so anyway, I had a good friend of mine in the music business, probably my best friend in the music business, a guy named Cam Carpenter. And he used to be an A&R person for and publicity for a lot of big major labels and stuff. And then he left the music business briefly, and he started working for the Hard Rock Cafe, like for the whole organization, Hard Rock Cafe organization. So anyway, they owned Gretzky's bar, or they ran it or something. He used to have a restaurant bar in Toronto. Uh, and so anyway, he calls me up one day and he says, "Wayne's in the bar." He said, "Come on down and bring the single and bring the album, and let's just see what we can do here. See if he'll sign it or something, or you can give it to him or whatever." So I said, "Okay, sure." So I hauled my butt down to Gretzky's, and I met my friend Cam there, and we were just sitting around talking, and it was packed with people, and there was a whole bunch of people that were trying to meet Wayne. All right, and Wayne wasn't meeting anybody. He was sitting there, and I think he was with Colin Campbell, or it may have been Colin Campbell, or the person who was the head of the NHLPA before him. I can't remember. And we just had a table, and a few other people were there. And so anyway, so we're kind of sitting there. We had a beer or whatever, and and then it was kind of like some time had gone by, and me and Cam kind of looked at each other and sort of like, "I'm not sure this is going to happen. Like, it doesn't seem like I'm going to get a chance to do it." Anyway, then the manager of the restaurant, this woman, comes up to me and goes, "Hey Mo, how's it going?" And I said, "I'm fine." She said, "Hey, you want to meet Wayne?" And I said, "Sure." And she said, "Okay." And she just literally just dragged me through this throng, mass of people, and brought me right to Wayne. And Wayne is there having dinner with what I believe was Colin Campbell and a few other people, and and this is when I think about it now, it's like one of the things you learn in the world of celebrities. You never walk up to somebody when they're eating. You never interrupt someone when they're having a meal. That's just the no-no, okay? And so anyway, so he's having dinner, but I never went up to him. I was dragged over to him.
Someone else.
So anyways, so he kind of so the woman says, "Hey Wayne, this is Moe Berg." And I said, "Hey Wayne," I said, "I'm a huge fan." And I was like starstruck, like I was, I couldn't even barely make it happen. And I said, I'm a big fan of yours. I said, I wrote a song about you. And I had a bag that I had the 45 and the CD in. And so I reach into the bag to get the single out, and the two goons stand up and go like this and put their arms out and like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on right now? And I was just so freaked out. I just took the CD and the 7-inch single, and I just put it on the table, and I literally just walked away, just like walked out of the whole scene, because I was so freaked out that they must have thought I was going for a weapon or something or whatever. And I was like, so that was my Wings Gretzky meeting story.
That's a great story. Um, you have spent the last few years not only teaching. I mentioned teaching earlier. Are you still teaching? Are you still doing
Yeah,
the
yeah,
at Fanshawe still?
yes, I am.
That's
Virtually, yes,
yeah. I was going to say now. Are you doing it online like every other teacher?
yes, I am. Like every other teacher, yeah.
Between teaching and you do a lot of production work for other young bands now.
Right.
I guess having Todd Rundgren produce you was a big thrill. You're probably now sort of paying that forward with some of the young bands that you're working with. Is that a whole other level of you know uh, work and commitment level than performing and being in a band?
Working working as a producer was just something that just kind of happened to me. You know, I've been approached to produce this. I've been approached to produce this record just by some friends of mine, and so I did it, and I was like, that was fun.
Mm.
And then I got a call from RCA, the record label, and they said, we have a band here. We want you to look at producing. And so I went, and they had signed a deal with them. So I went and looked at them. I said, I'd love to work with these guys. And so then that happened. And so then it was just kind of like, once you start doing it and the word gets out that you're doing it, then you start getting phone calls and to work with people. And so at the time, this was right around the time that the pursuit of happiness was kind of like becoming sort of exhausted, and I was thinking, I was seeing how much I just kind of hated being in the music business. I hated that. I always loved playing shows and making records and being with the guys and girls in the band, but I really having to go out and try and sell yourself all the time was just, I found it exhausting. And so I thought, it was just kind of a seamless transfer. The band just kind of wound down, and then my production career kind of wound up, and so I just kind of did it, and I started to really enjoy it. And it was a way to still be creative and still be in the studio. But once the record was made, I didn't have to go out and spend my, life promoting it and
Yeah.
begging people to play it and begging people to buy the record. I could just like walk away and go on to the next thing. So it was pretty great.
Um, I want to talk about the Trans Canada Highwaymen project,
Sure.
how that came up. Uh, Anybody who hasn't seen you guys, and I know obviously we're not going to be seeing you for a little while yet until things get back to normal, whatever our normal is going to be. But Stephen Page, Bare Naked Ladies, Craig Northey from The Odds, Chris Murphy from Sloan. How do you guys get together and just decide you're going to tour and start doing shows together?
Well, actually, we were put together by a guy named Jim Milan, and Jim Milan is a sort of like a theater director, producer kind of guy, and he's responsible for the Alton Brown show, the theatrical show, and the Penn and Teller, and
Mhm.
he worked on that Spider-Man thing,
Mhm.
and he and with the Mythbusters and all these people, the kids in the hall. So he puts together these shows often of performers, and he puts together sort of a theatrical sort of a version of it. And so his idea was he wanted to get some songwriters of a certain era and who had some experience and had some history and stuff, and put them on stage and kind of have them play some music and tell some stories and that kind of thing. And a little different from this sort of songwriter in the round thing that it was a common thing. This was going to be more of a multimedia kind of show, like a real theatrical production. And so anyway, so he contacted me immediately, and we're good friends, and I'd worked with him on some other stuff before in the past. And so he was saying, I was thinking about Chris Murphy from Sloan, and Craig Northey, who was also a really good friend of Jim's, and then Craig plays in Stephen Page's band, and one of his songwriting partners and stuff. And so Craig had suggested Stephen, and so unbeknownst to me, Stephen and Craig and Chris had earlier had talked about getting together and doing something, the three of them. And so anyway, so it just kind of, we got together to do it, and it felt pretty good. And so we were starting to get this theatrical production together, and we were shooting a bunch of media and getting a bunch of stuff together to make it work. And we went out and did a show at there's a winery out in Niagara.
Jackson Triggs.
What's that?
Jackson Triggs.
Yeah, the Jackson Triggs, where they have that beautiful amphitheater. And so we went out and played the show, and it was like, wow, it was so fun. We all had a blast doing it. And so then that, so everyone was like, oh, that sort of made everyone kind of commit to the project a bit. So anyway, we ended up with a bunch of shows, theater shows. And so we did this big theater tour of it was just mostly around Ontario, and we had a blast doing it. I mean, the thing about that band is that everybody's busy. I mean, Sloan is very busy. They're still a very, very popular band. And they've been promoting records, and so Chris's time to do something like this is limited. Stephen Page, who is essentially one of Canada's national treasures, he's a very in-demand performer. He makes records and he tours constantly. That people want to see him play because he's an extraordinary live performer. And Craig has the band, the Odds still, and he also plays in Strippers Union with
Tragically Hip.
Bobby, with Bobby from Tragically Hip, and also he has a career in television doing soundtrack work and stuff like that. So, there's a limited amount of time where everyone's like, we can be available to do a show. So we ended up doing shows here and there once in a while when we can.
The whole point of that show is that you guys get together and you do a bunch of their songs, a bunch of your songs, a bunch of his songs, and you perform them together. Did you choose the
Right.
popular songs? Was it we like this song. This was my favorite song that I recorded.
No, the idea behind the band was let's just give people what they want. And so we made a very conscious decision. It's like everyone picked their 4 biggest hits and let's go out and play those. All right. And the difference between the Trans-Canada Highway Band and a lot of these sort of things that get put together, these songwriting circles or is that we are a band. We're an actual band. And so we play drums and bass and guitars, and we switch instruments, and everyone takes a turn at the drums and everyone takes a turn on bass. And so we play like a band. So it's not like a bunch of guys sitting on stools in front of everybody playing on an acoustic guitar and everyone's singing their songs one by one. It's like we're the band that plays Brian Wilson or someone who's cool or underwhelmed, and we play our own particular versions of those songs.
Has there been any thoughts or conversations about recording?
Yes, there are conversations constantly about recording, and I don't want to say too much about it but yeah, I will say this: there is something in the works currently with the Trans-Canada Highwaymen, and whether it comes out or gets to the end, we'll just see. But it's a cool project, and if it does see the light of day, I think it would be a really neat thing.
I want to mention, and I hope my phone hasn't died here, but the Monteforte, which is a project that you used to do with some of the other members of Pursuit of Happiness, almost like a cover band. It was a cover band, really.
It was a cover band, yeah.
Yeah, and you guys got to sort of have alter egos and get on stage under a different name and perform. Was that just something that came about because you wanted to have fun and goof off and times when the band wasn't working? And I mean, because you guys don't do Pursuit of Happiness stuff, you're doing Betty Davis eyes and ABBA and how did that project come about? Was that just to have fun?
It was just to have fun. One of the things, we went to Australia a bunch of times and performed there. We made a bunch of friends down there, I guess. And some of our friends had a cover band that they used to play every Sunday night in this bar called the Sandringham. And they just played cover songs, and all the neighborhood people came, and all their friends and friends of the band, and some of the friends, fans of those guys' bands would come. And we went to that, and we just thought, man, would it be fun to do something like this? And back in Toronto, because one of the things we found was that we go on tour and we go months and months and months playing shows almost every night, and then you go home and it's like, now what am I going to do? It seems like, oh, I need to rest or something like that, and you feel like that for about 3 days, and it's like I wouldn't mind doing something right now. So we thought, why don't we do something like that? And we thought, let's not be a cover band. So what we did is we wrote a list of like 50 covers, and we just chose the very worst songs of all those 50 songs. So we didn't want to do anything that an actual cover band would do. So we thought no one's going to do Betty Davis Eyes or The Lord's Prayer or Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves or all these songs. We thought no cover band's going to do that, so we'll do that, and that's what's going to kind of make us unique. So it's exactly what you said. We did it completely for fun. We thought this is a chance for us to go out and play and have all our friends come and see us, and we can just kind of get together and see everybody and have a couple of beers and play some songs and act stupid. And Brad Barker, who became the new bass player of the Pursuit of Happiness, he sort of became the MC of the show, and he's a very, very funny guy. And so the whole thing ended up being played for laughs, and so it was just a really fun night out for everybody.
I ask about that because I worked at HMV at the time, for HMV at the time, and I think it was a Christmas party. I mentioned it to you earlier before we started, but alcohol was involved that night a lot. So we were sitting there and seeing a bunch of guys come down to the stage and start setting up and everything and getting ready to perform. And we're looking and we're like, is that Moe Berg? And we got excited thinking, did they hire Pursuit of Happiness to play for us tonight? Then you guys start and it's Betty Davis Eyes. It's Saturday Night by the Bay City Rollers. And I remember we were just in shock that we were sitting here watching you guys perform these songs. But it was one of the, from what I remember anyway, one of the greatest nights that we had the entire time that I worked there. It was a phenomenal show. I've actually got a photograph. I don't know if you can see that of you guys on stage that night.
Yeah, we all dressed in the same clothes. We bought those love shirts at like a I don't know, I think they were at Honest Ads, which was a thrift store here, not thrift store, but a bargain store here in Toronto. And so yeah, we sort of dress all in the same clothes and we go and play these shows. We got a lot of sort of corporate gigs like that. We do a lot of these sort of parties for like the Toronto Film Festival or for HMV, things like that. And half the people would like it and half the people would be like, this is horrible.
Oh,
So,
it was great, and it was so much fun. And after the show, you guys hung out and came down and chatted with us. That's my friend Dorothy and Jason, who worked at the store with me, and you came down and chatted with us. It was a fantastic night.
oh great.
Um,
Well, I'm glad.
uh, when this is all over and you guys are done and not that the pandemic's going to be over anytime soon, but when you're finally able to go out and do things and musically, is there any chance you've performed on and off with Pursuit of Happiness and done some gigs and stuff over the years? Has there been any thoughts of doing that? Have you been writing? I know you do a lot of writing when it comes to book reviews and books and stuff. You do your blog, which I've read, and that's fantastic. Have you been writing music? Are you continuing doing lyrics and that kind of stuff? And is there any plans on doing anything when this is done?
I write a lot with other people. I've sort of become like a song finisher for people. And so people will come to me with an idea for a song and I help them finish it. And so I do that a lot with the artists that I work with, a lot of people that I work with on a production level. I do that sometimes. But I don't typically sit down and write a song. I mean, the Pursuit, Universal Records just released the um, Love Junk as a anniversary reissue, and so it was like a two CD, two album set. And so there's talk about doing that with some of the other records as well. And so we're kind of in the early stages of that. And so Pursuit of Happiness would probably go out and play some shows. We do have shows booked for the future, and we had a bunch of shows that we had to cancel. So the Pursuit of Happiness is still planning to play shows. We still have the idea that we're going to go out and do some shows, and especially if these other records come out, we get reissued, then we'll definitely go out and do some shows. There's some plans for the Canada Highwaymen. Also had some shows canceled, and hopefully those will be rescheduled. So yeah, so the plan is to go and play shows once that's a thing again, and we all know we don't really know when that's even going to be. So
Well, we're all looking forward to it. I know I saw you, as I said, perform live a few times with Pursuit of Happiness. Can't wait to see the Trans Canada Highwaymen. I want to thank you so much for being with us at the Record Player. It's been great talking to you. I hope you and your family stay safe, and thank you once again for being with us today.
no, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot, Mo. Take care of yourself.
You too.